Tonight's guest is John Fischbach. John is an engineer, long-standing. He's done many records, worked with many artists. I think Stevie Wonder is an artist that's often mentioned with John's name. He engineered one of his records, I think won a Grammy for it, and also worked with Carole King and a host of others. Please welcome John Fischbach. So, John, also, I mean, you own Piety Street, right?
I own it with Mark.
You and Mark Bingham.
Yeah.
So how long has that been going on?
Almost 5 years now.
So you're trying to make is it working out after Katrina? You're still up and running and everything?
Yeah, we're lucky. We're close to the river, and the water came about a block and a half from us, but we had no water, and I looked the other day, I think October 15th, I was attempting to do a session in there. You know, there were some people that had stuff kind of in the works and other people who really wanted to do something and they wanted to do it there. So when we had electricity, which was part of the time, we worked. And we've been busy ever since.
You did that Elvis Costello, Alan T.
Yes,
Saint record?
we did that there.
How'd that work out?
Worked out great. No brownouts, so that was real good. No, we were real lucky. People who came understood that the power would go off occasionally, and you learn to live with it, and you try and back up your stuff as much as possible, as often as possible, and wait it out. Sometimes you have to wait till the next day.
Do you find that you're getting business from outside the city, that people are coming to the city to work at the studio?
We always got that business. We always had business from all over the place. We have a really big room, and it's especially good for rock and roll drums. So we have a lot of people that come from LA. Basically, they'll just do drum tracks.
Really?
And then leave and go do the rest there. We do a lot of stuff with Dave Fortman, who's a young producer engineer who does a lot of hit records. And he does a lot of his stuff at Piety Street. And people come from all over to do it. It's a really, really, really great room.
It's pretty much the major studio in town these days, right?
Yeah, everyone else got wiped out. So
Ultrasonic.
Yeah, we're kind of the ones left standing. I mean, there are a lot of studios in New Orleans. There aren't, I'll reference it as a world-class studio, and all that doesn't mean that it's a great studio. What it means is that if you're someone like me, an engineer, who's used to working a particular way, you could come to Piety Street and you'll recognize the equipment that we have. So we have a big solid-state logic board. We have analog tape machines. We have, Pro Tools like everybody else. But we have recognizable stuff. We have a lot of really, really great microphones. I think we have over 150 mics. So an engineer can come from England and come to Piety Street and walk in and get to work. It's not a problem, whereas a lot of the other studios are kind of patched together pieces, and someone like me walking in, I would have to rely on whoever actually owns the studio or runs it to help, because you'll be lost otherwise.
Mm-hmm. What kind of staff do you have over there?
Small. We have basically two guys. There's Mark and I. We have Sean, who's a minor partner, but who runs the place. She does all the business of the studio. We have two guys that are, they actually started out as kind of interns, and then they became assistant engineers, and now both of them are more than proficient at being an engineer. So they're both Pro Tools wizards. They make things that can't happen. Things that are, physically impossible, they still make it happen. So that's basically it. And then we have other guys that come in and work there occasionally as engineers. So we have a very, very small staff. Most of the people who come from away, from out of the city, they come and they bring their own engineers anyway.
Well, I mean, the studio business is kind of threatened, wouldn't you say, with the advent of Pro Tools in everybody's basement or bedroom? How do you deal with that?
What we have to offer is what you can't do in your bedroom. It would be really hard for you to fit, you know, a 60-piece choir and a 35-piece orchestra in your bedroom. Also, you could never get the same drum sound as I could get, probably for two reasons. Number one, the kind of what I would call prosumer equipment is not the same as my equipment. The plugins that you use are not the same as the hardware that I have that it emulates. So there are things that we do have to offer that you could set up a really good studio in your home if you have a lot of money. But, you know, all the claims that are made in the magazines about, you know, you can do the same as, you know, this studio, you can't. You can't.
So you feel positive about the future of the recording studio business?
Yeah, I think it's much smaller. You know, when I started, which was in 1969, when I first started to actually record stuff and had my first studio, there were only a handful of independent studios, and the rest were the recording company studios, the company studios. So you had, you know, CBS and RCA. You had, those companies had their own studios. Their artists recorded in those studios. In the middle to late 60s, that started to change. The music changed. The business started to change. There were all these young musicians, and they wanted to work with younger people. They didn't want to work with the guy who was doing Frank Sinatra. And so a few of us started to build these studios, and you know, we built a major studio and spent, you know, a lot of money. Had a brilliant partner who built consoles, and boy, we were packed. We were packed with young people who just didn't want to work in a studio owned by their record company.
Right. Well, now, you were in this city for 5 years with Potty Street. Where were you before that?
I lived in L.A.
So you were one of those L.A. engineers that did all the rock and roll records.
We did, yeah, I owned a studio, and almost I mean, it's hard to believe, but really almost everything we recorded was a hit. I mean, because it was a time Motown was moving out of Detroit, and they opened a studio, a small studio in L.A., but yet we did all the Jackson 5 and all the Miracles and all of those records every day. Then we did the Carole Kings and the Jackson Browns and the James Taylors and the REO Speedwagons. We just, you know, we were real lucky. And obviously Stevie Wonder, we did, you know, that for years. We had a great studio. Again, a great room. That's a really big selling point, is a really great room to record in, where maybe you have leakage, but you could actually do a live record in there, and the leakage sounds good. That's it. Great room.
Well, how did you get your start as an engineer? Nowadays, everybody goes to Middle Tennessee State or something to be a Pro Tools engineer, but we didn't have that back then.
No, we did not.
How did you come about it?
We had starting cleaning the toilet school, and that's the school I went to. I actually started as a lousy musician. I was a really lousy bass player and an equal lousy singer. But I loved music, and so I had these friends that were doing a lot of music and writing a lot of stuff, and that was Carole King. And there were just a whole bunch of us that were friends. And Carole did a record called The City, and it was with another guy, Danny Korchmar, and her husband-to-be, Charles Larkey, and Jimmy Gordon played drums on it, and it was not a hit. But our friend James Taylor was having a big hit, and so I said to Carole one day, you know, we should go in and you should be a singer-songwriter by yourself.
Wow.
So...
you talked her into that?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And so we went to Lou Adler, who had been her producer, and all of a sudden he wanted to be a movie producer, and he said, sure, go ahead and do it. So we went in and we did writer, and I was the producer.
Really?
I was not the engineer. But I soon realized that as a producer, you need to be able to say to the engineer something that he can understand. And I didn't have that vocabulary. And the engineer was a really great engineer called Andrew Berliner. He was a really terrific engineer, did a huge number of Motown hits. And he had just opened the studio and literally just had it open a couple of months. And I came to do Carole King there. And I just stayed there. And I stayed there, for years and years and years. So that's kind of how I got into it. I realized I needed to learn what to say to an engineer that made some kind of sense.
More bass.
Yeah, or something better than more bass or louder.
Well, it worked out okay. So tell us about Stevie Wonder and how you got to be involved with that record.
When I went to college, I went to the University of Denver, and I was involved in music there. And I lived with a bunch of guys that were really, really incredible musicians. I mean, really incredible musicians. And some of those guys landed up in a band called Lothar and the Hand People. And they were produced by this guy, Bob Margouleff. And so I became friendly with Bob Margouleff, and then he had a partner, Malcolm Cecil. And they were instrumental in bringing the Moog synthesizer into pop music. So they had one that was, it was pretty much, it was the size almost of this curtain. I mean, about that high, but it was huge. It was called Tonto. I mean, it was monstrous. And they landed up being Stevie's engineer. I would go visit them, and I became friends with Stevie. And this was in New York City, and they were working at a studio called Electric Ladyland, where Jimi Hendrix recorded and a lot of other famous people. And eventually they left New York. They all left New York, and they decided they were going to LA. Mm-hmm. And so one day I got a call from Bob Margouleff saying, we're coming, can we book the studio? I said, sure. So they came and they did a bunch of work at my studio with Stevie, and they put out a whole bunch of great albums over a few years. Then another studio gave them this really great deal, so my friends left, and they went to another studio. And then a year or so later, one day, I got a call from Stevie, said, do you have time at the studio? And I said, no, not today, but maybe I think we have some tomorrow. He said, can I come and record? And I said, yeah, Bob and Malcolm coming? No, Bob and Malcolm were not coming. Was I available? And I said, sure. I mean, we had been friends by then for years, so that started Songs in the Key of Life, and 2.5 years after that, we actually put the album out. Yeah. So it was in those days, you could spend 2.5 years doing an album and a lot of money and put it out, and obviously he recouped the money the first week. And that
was a huge record.
That was a huge record, yeah. If you're lucky in your lifetime, you get to do one thing that maybe you leave behind and that people appreciate. And I was very lucky. I was really young, and I got to do it at the beginning. And then when you do that, then you have to accept that a lot of the stuff you're going to do after that is not going to be as good.
But it came to you because of that.
Came to you because of that. Can you make me sound like, Stevie Wonder? And I would tell him, if you could play or write like him, yes, I could.
Well, I was fortunate to work with him too. He's a certified genius, that guy.
He is a certified genius.
Amazing. So what else? I mean, what other experiences have you had? You worked closely with Carole for a long time. Were you involved with Tapestry at all?
No, I did the one before Tapestry, and then I think Lou Adler realized, ooh, this is really good, because he used a series of songs that were from the same period. He used all the same musicians. If you listen to Writer, you'll hear a lot of what was in Tapestry. So yes, no, I did the one before.
Right.
Lucky me.
That was another huge record, Tapestry. What was it, 10 million records or so?
It was, I think, the biggest seller up until Thriller. So that's a long run being yeah.
So nowadays, you see yourself as a producer more than an engineer?
You know, I've made so many records that I'm real picky about what I record now. So if Terrence comes to me and says, you know, I have a soundtrack I want to do for a movie, yes, I work with Terrence. I think the difference now is that I'm used to working with really great musicians that don't need all the stuff that Pro Tools brings. All the ability to do all the editing, either, you know, rearranging stuff or correcting somebody's pitch, or, you know, the fact that the guy couldn't really play drums, but, you know, so you have to grid the drums and do all that. I just can't do that. So I'm very picky about who I work with, and so I prefer to work with people that can actually do it by themselves.
Do you think that Pro Tools was, I hear a lot of guys talk about Pro Tools being the death of creative music. Do you feel that?
No, absolutely not. I'll give you a good example. I work with a Welsh singer who's becoming real popular. She was just on the Today Show. And because the budget was not that great and we needed strings, we found a guy in England who does unbelievable string arrangements. So we send him Pro Tools projects, and he fills them in. And the beauty is, when I get it back, I can move those phrases all over the place. So for things like that, it's really, really phenomenal to take something and be able to manipulate it that way. I can do things that obviously I could never do on tape, and that's a blessing. We put organ on the wrong master take of a song. Because what I still like to record in analog, sorry, but I do. So I'll record basic tracks in analog onto a Studer, and then when I get ready to mix, I take it and I put it onto Pro Tools. And I still think that sounds better than necessarily putting it right to Pro Tools. Mm-hmm. So my assistant engineer made a boo-boo, and he took the wrong take of a song, and it was a little bit faster than the real master take. And so when I went to mix the song, I kept thinking, there's something wrong, and the artist assured me, no, this is the right take. And I said, no, this is not. And I went back, and sure enough, the take that was the master take was just a little bit slower. So now my assistant engineer had to take the organ phrase by phrase and insert it in the proper take, but because the other one was faster, they were a little short, all the phrases. And by the time he was through, everything fit perfectly. I still, to this day, haven't figured out how he does it, but he could do it. For those things, for those kinds of particular editing problems and also creative things, I think it's fantastic. I'm one of those guys who doesn't use a lot of EQ when I record. I'd rather buy a really good mic and have a really good mic preamp and figure out what mics sound good on what. So for me, I'm not big into plugins. I'm just not. I don't do that kind of music where I necessarily need that. So for that, for me, it's no big deal. It's turning into a really good recording and editing medium, and as the converters get better and better, the sound gets better and better, and I use it more and more. Up until we got our new Pro Tools HD system, I just wouldn't use it. I could hear such a big difference between the analog. And also, if you mix and you take like a Pro Tools mix and then take a half-inch mix to a mastering guy and ask him, which one are you going to use? There's never been a time where they would say the Pro Tools mix. No, because the analog just sounded so much better, and the emulation programs that they have stink. the tape sounds really, really good.
Well, you know, it's interesting that the progress in audio used to be involving a higher level of quality of sound, and now with the iPod and compression and MP3, it's a lower level quality of sound. The advances are all about that. How does that reconcile with all this money and time you spend mixing?
I think it's something that you just have to accept. Either you are going to try and do your best to make the most sonically beautiful thing that you can, or the most sonically ugly, whatever it is that you're into, because I know people that really ugly is beautiful. You know, the crappier it is, the dirtier it is, they just love that, and that's great. But they want to keep that, and at a certain point you have to just give it up. You know, that people are going to mess with it, and they're going to make MP3s out of it. Though I must tell you that the AACs that you get from Apple sound better than any cassette we ever made. So our expectations are very high now, and I think eventually, you know, we'll have iPods that have huge amounts of storage, and so you'll use Apple lossless and you won't lose anything. And evidently a lot of people are storing now their collections in Apple lossless.
Takes up all your gigabytes.
Yeah, I mean, that's another big thing that people should be talking about, is that we are losing a generation's worth of music that isn't going to be around. A good example is digital tape recorders. They were used all over the country in the 80s and into the 90s, and like a Mitsubishi 32 track.
Right.
Now, if you take one of those old tapes, chances are you put that tape on that's, you know, almost 20 years old, you're going to get two things back. You'll get a time code track, and you'll get the analog editing track.
That's right.
And the rest of it is gone. It's just gone. There are too many errors, and it won't play back. Same with the Sony machines. All those digital machines have big problems. Leave a hard drive sit for a year and then try and start it up. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So all the people that have archived all this music onto hard drives, we're losing a lot of it. So as a result, a lot of people now go backwards, and they do take their Pro Tools things and they play it onto analog tape, because we know 20 years, 30 years, 40 years from now, you can retrieve that.
Still the most robust storage medium.
Yeah.
I mean, I did that with digital tape too, and surround sound mixes, and I'd put them on analog multi-track tape just to make sure they lived.
Yeah, because you have enough errors, it's gone. It's useless. Try and put a DAT in, and play it. If it doesn't shed off, if the oxide doesn't shed into nothingness, then all you do are get dropouts and errors.
Well, this is a problem.
It is. It's a big, big problem, and people have not addressed this problem. Well, that's not true. NARIS, the Grammy people, have a producer and engineer wing, and a bunch of really great engineers got together and wrote a paper on how to not only deliver Pro Tools and various DAW projects, but how to archive the stuff. Because everybody's using all these plugins, how do you archive all of that so that if you ever need to bring it back, how do you bring it back?
Right.
It's a big problem, and it's something that, maybe one of you guys out there will solve that problem. But it is a big problem because, 40, 50 years from now, young guys like you, young girls, are going to want to hear some of that stuff, and it's not going to be available. So it is a problem. That is a big problem right now.
Well, are you working on something right now, today? Are you in a project?
I have a mastering room at Piety Street, so I do a lot of mastering. And one of the ways for me to be involved in a lot of new music without having to sit through the painful part of making it is to master it, because then no matter how bad it is, number one, I can help it get better. And number two, I'm usually only immersed in it for a day or two instead of weeks or.
Well, so define mastering.
Mastering is a process of taking your final mixes and make it ready for another medium. So it could be vinyl, it could go onto a record, it could be that it's going to be a CD, it could be that it's going to be a Super Audio CD or a DVD-A. And what we try and do is take a group of songs and make it into a cohesive work so that there's some kind of linearity in, let's say, the vocal. A lot of times I will try and make like the vocal at the same level instead of trying to make every song the same level, and then the vocal might be louder in one song and softer in the next. And so I try and have something cohesive through it. If it's instrumental, it might be, that it's a sax record. I did Rob Wagner yesterday, so we try and have some kind of cohesiveness in his sax throughout, so that one song might really pop and be loud, and the other might be this little tiny ballad, but the sax level maybe will stay similar throughout the whole thing. We use compression and limiting and equalization, and I split things into mids and sides so I can process the middle. A lot of times there's so much energy in the middle with a bass and bass drum that I really find that there's no sense in massaging the whole mix when I can just zero in on what needs to be controlled. And it allows something to be wider.
You're basically using a 2-track tape, left and right.
Basically left and right.
Right.
But I split it into two different things. I split it into, instead of left and right, I converted into middles and sides. So let's say you have cymbals that are like really, really bright, but yet the vocal isn't really bright, so I can get rid of some of the harshness in the cymbals without touching, because they're usually on the sides,
Right.
without touching a vocal.
Oh, I see.
And I can also control a bass or a bass drum, which is in the middle, without the sides
Right.
pumping.
Well, talk a second about stereo. I guess everybody understands stereo at this point, but you are creating a a field, and you're
Yeah.
the phantom center. And can you
Right.
talk about that for a
Yeah.
second?
It's really, stereo mixing. The actual mixing of the record is an art, and part of that art is psychoacoustics, to give somebody listening in the end the impression that even though there's a speaker here and a speaker there, that the sound is coming from here. There are ways now to make the sound actually come from the sides or from behind you, even though the speakers are in front of you. So I can do certain things in mastering, but I can't create miracles, unfortunately. And one of the problems with Pro Tools, especially people who have earlier Pro Tools rigs who mix within Pro Tools, is that their mixes sound like they're coming out of a pea shooter. They're just so tiny. There are too many plugins, and too many phase problems, and then delay problems with different amounts of delay on different plugins, and it becomes this kind of soupy mess that it just kind of collapses in on itself, and I think a lot of it has to do with using up the DSP that's in the cards. It's much better now, but mixing is an art. And some people are really great artists, and some people really suck. They can't hear worth a damn. And we get a lot of that. I mean, we get stuff in that's distorted, and you just wonder who was listening to it. I did a jazz record recently, and the guy came in, and I said to him, "Did you record this in mono?" No, he didn't. I said, "Well, it's in mono. The whole thing is mono. There's like nothing here. There's nothing there. It's all in the middle." He said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, it's not supposed to be." Well, he went back and he fixed some stuff, and it was a little stereo, but not really much. And then I saw him a little bit later, and he said, he played it to all of his friends, and nobody even noticed.
I don't think people listen to stereo. I mean, you're spending, if you're mixing a record, you're panning all the instruments. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, we use panning to create space. I use not just panning, but delays, reverbs, echoes. I mean, just different things to give things actually acoustic space. And so that it's not in mono. One of the great things is in stereo, when you hear really great stereo, it has this really great impact. It's really very powerful. Not to say that a mono recording can't be powerful, but a really good stereo mix is really great, and you get this sense of things being in different places. Whereas the ham-fisted engineer, the mix is just kind of everything trying to get as loud as the next thing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, people are into compressors. You all know what compressors are. Anyway, that's the big thing. Make everything as loud as humanly possible. And the abuse of compressors also is a problem.
That was something that really was aimed to get the radio to sound.
Yeah, but what people don't understand is that it really has the opposite effect. When you have a highly compressed record, unless it's done by someone really good, because there are engineers, Dave Fortman being one of them, he does Evanescence. Here's a guy, he does supergroup, he does a lot of really heavy metal, he does, death metal, really great stuff. It's fantastic, because he's fantastic. And when he does it, it still has this great power and great breadth to it, but yet that meter just sits like that. That meter does not move.
Interesting.
But it sounds like it does. Yeah. It sounds like it has great dynamics. But he's really, really good at what he does. Most people, if it's sitting like that, it sounds like crap.
Yeah.
I do want to say something about the radio and compression. The thought that if you compress it, you make it really loud, and then it gets on the radio, it's going to be louder than somebody else's, is really a fallacy. The fact of the matter is that they're going to compress it again. So everything comes out at the same volume, but now your work that's already been compressed now is compressed again. So everything is being shoved up, everything in the middle, so it actually becomes smaller sounding than the thing that was left kind of alone and let the radio station compress it. Because, they want to put out the most signal that they can. Mm-hmm. So they compress the hell out of this stuff, as well as limit it. And they do it in multi-bands now. Mm-hmm. I found that the best sounding records are not the records that are compressed to death. The other thing in mastering now, all the mastering engineers are asked that to make it as loud as humanly possible, which is just horrendous. Right. It makes it difficult to even listen to a whole CD that's just so loud. Right. There's never a break. And when you hear like a Johnny Cash, his album, his last album, was done by Rick Rubin, who has a great record company, and Rick Rubin does great stuff. But why does it have to be so loud that it's distorted? It's Johnny Cash, for God's sakes. It's not Megadeth. It's Johnny Cash. There's a place for all this different music. There's a place for all the different techniques, but not everything has to be loud.
Yeah. So the art of mixing is taking the instruments and placing them between these two speakers, right? And also in front to back.
Yeah.
So use that compression, use reverb and echo and just volume, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it all about volume? Isn't mixing all about volume?
No, it really isn't. Because I tell young engineers, before you move a fader up, move the pan pot, move the instrument first to see if it will pop out over here without you doing anything. Or that's what equalizers are for. So if there are too many things in a small band of frequencies, right, get it out of there. Move it. EQ it so it's somewhere else.
When you EQ, you're raising frequencies up and down.
Or lowering them. I tell young engineers, think lower first before you. It's too easy to keep pushing things up, keep raising things with EQ, when really it's easier to find a way to bring something else down.
Mm-hmm. Do you mix and master at low levels?
When I started, The monitors I used were twice that size. They were made by George Augsburger, and they were huge. I mean, and they got loud. I mean, really, really loud.
You played them loud.
And we played and we mixed them loud. Well, you know what? We found that if you mixed really loud and you could still hear the vocal, when it got on the radio, that vocal was going to be loud enough. And then someone invented these little cubes called oratones.
Yeah.
And so that was cute. These really sucked. They were really horrible. They were really horrible. But if you got a really great mix and it sounded good on an orotone, you know you had a good mix. At my studio in LA, we had also an FM transmitter. Huh. And we could actually transmit mixes into a car at the loading dock. Yeah. And that worked really good too. Yeah. Because in those days, we made separate radio mixes. We made a mix that was definitely, first of all, it was in mono because we did AM radio mixes. And so they were really treated differently.
Name your top 5 great sounding records.
I think the early Elton John albums that were done by Robin Cable in England were brilliant, and they really set the standard for a long, long time. The Jeff Emmerich records, the Beatles records, you listen to those, they sound great. Who else do I like? I like Metallica. Metallica is a really great sounding band, and their records sound really, really great. Who do I like today? That's a good question. Who do I like today? What have I listened to lately that I liked? I like a lot of the kids. There's a kid, Sufjan Stevens, and he does really great records, and they sound really, really great. But here's someone who's in total control of what they do, and they do it all themselves. There was a guy named Emmett Rhodes in the 70s who did the same thing, who made just brilliant, brilliant records, and he did it all himself. He played everything himself. He recorded it all on an 8-track, and he just made brilliant, brilliant records that sounded fantastic. I've heard records that were done on, an 8-track cassette recorder that were brilliant. It's not the medium. It's the person. It's what you hear in your head, and I think that's really what makes the difference with different engineers. George Massenburg, the greatest engineer to ever live, because here's a man, you can take anything that he's ever recorded and you can play it on anything, and it sounds great. At JBL, they have a fantastic laboratory, and they have a listening room, and they bring people in to listen to speakers, and it's all done in mono, and there's like a black mesh, and behind it are 5 speakers, and you push a button and it's playing music, and a speaker will come to the front, and you can listen to that, and then you push another button and a different speaker comes to that same spot, so you can listen to the same piece of music. When you listen to a George Massenburg piece, it's hard to tell which speaker is which, because it just sounds so good on everything. So he hears that in his head, and people ask me, about recording. I say it's only what I hear. I do what I hear. If I hear that something needs more mid-range, I add more mid-range. If I hear that something's too bright, I bring it back. The way I hear balances and space are just the way just the way I hear it. Other people hear it differently, and so their records come out differently. My partner, Mark Bingham, who is so brilliant, I mean, our stuff sounds so unbelievably different, just completely, completely different, and we have different ways of doing it. I think you just keep practicing. With time comes a lot of these skills.
Would you define yourself as having a particular sound? I mean, what is your best record, and why is it so good?
What is my best record? I think they get better as I do them. This Judith Owen album I did just sounds really, really great. It sounds really great. I mean, it's, you know, maybe not your kind of music because it's very kind of jazzy and Celtic at the same time. But she's a brilliant piano player, she's a brilliant songwriter, and she's Welsh, so she sings like an angel. I mean, except she has this ballsy, incredible, a lot of people think she's black, but she's not black, she's Welsh. They just have this kind of chesty, you know.
So you like that record?
I like that record.
So you learn something new every time you mix a record? You
I learn something new every time I walk into that room. Every time there's something new to be learned. I just learned something so interesting doing this album. I've done a lot of albums that have acoustic bass, and I was having trouble on this album fitting the bass in. And I kept adding like mid-range and a little top to see if it would cut through. No, it wouldn't do it. So in frustration, I just took 5,000 cycles and I just cut everything off above that. And lo and behold, the whole thing popped out of the track. Wow. Now that's absolutely counterintuitive to anything I'd ever done before. So yes, I think you learn every time. And the thing is, you have to keep trying. Don't ever let an instrument beat you. You know, if you work long enough at it, you can make it happen. You really can.
Do you set up different mics? I mean, by this time you know what sounds good on a cello or what sounds good on a trumpet, right? You don't test out mics.
Yeah, I do.
You do?
I do. Like one day we had 17 microphones on a bass, an acoustic bass.
You're one of those, aren't you?
Well, because, excuse me, the fallacy is that bass frequencies should be recorded with a larger diaphragm. But what we found out is that's bullshit. That's just absolutely not true. Because with all the, I mean, we used ribbon mics, we used old, you know, condenser mics, beautiful tube mics, very crisp, transparent little condensers, like almost measurement mics. Well, that microphone has like a 1/4-inch diaphragm in there. It was one of the winners. It sounded fantastic. You know, so we had a great bass player, and we just moved him. We put a line down, and we just moved him.
That's interesting.
So I think there were 17 mics that we tried.
What about vocalists? I mean, every vocalist probably has an ideal microphone, right?
Yeah, do the same thing.
Just keep trying till you find what you like.
Well, certain mics, you know, sound really great. I have, you know, like I have a Sound Deluxe microphone that's fantastic on certain people. I mean, it's literally fantastic. You can hear like their tonsils. It's so great. And then there's a combination of that microphone and for years I poo-pooed this cable thing about, you know, really great cables until this really great engineer from LA came in to do Less Than Jake. And he had these big fat microphone cables, and I thought, what a joke. So I asked him about it, and he said, you know, he said, I used to poo-poo cables. He said, but then I tried these, and he said, they just sound really good. So of course I called the company, and I got some, and I was in the middle of doing, they arrived, and I was in the middle of doing a bass overdub, so I was using a regular cable. As soon as that was done, I switched cables, and we started another song. Same bass, same setting, same everything. But the difference in the sound was astounding.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's a silver, it's cast silver microphone cables. They sound great.
But so many variables. I mean, what kind of monitors do you like? Mix on near field monitors?
Yeah, I use PMCs. They're British, and they're powered with these high-end Canadian amplifiers that are built in, and they sound really good to me. Other people like other. I think that's really a taste thing. Right. I think you just find something that you like that you can work with. I found that if I mix on them, that when I take it other places, and I take it especially to the mastering room, I don't have to do anything. Oh. Really, it sounds great right from the beginning. So, and my partner Mark, he flips them on their side, and then he uses these other British ones, We have, Mackeys. We have Yamaha NS10s, the worst speaker ever made, but
everybody's got them.
Everybody had them, so you had to learn to use them. You had to.
How much time we got left? Anybody have any questions for John?
You've been around the recording business a long time, and you can go train at a school to be an engineer, but how have you seen guys become producers, and how does anybody crack into that? That's their mission?
First of all, I think you have to understand this is the world's worst business. I think you need to understand that. I mean, it really is. It's a nasty business. So number one, you have to love it. You have to really love it, and you have to say to yourself, you know what? I'm going to do this. This is what I want to do. And I think you go out and you find people to work with. As a producer, what kind of music do you like? Find people that are doing that and see if you can beg your way in and say, I have some good ideas. Most bands need a producer. Most bands need that. If it's just to keep them on track and not do a lot, I think great producers really bring out what's great in an artist. And then there are great producers who actually are the artist. I think Daniel Lanois is the best example of that. Throughout his career, the records that he has made, no matter who it's been with, whether it's Bob Dylan or whether, it doesn't matter, or the Neville Brothers, it's really a Daniel Lanois album. He uses the artist just as an instrument or a color or whatever, but they really are his albums. And how do you break in? Today? Oh my God. I wish I had an answer for you. To be even an engineer, when I started, there were so few independent engineers that really, people didn't have much choice but to come to you. They could go to a company, their regular company studio, or they could come to us. Now, everybody's an engineer. Everybody. And a producer, yes, because you can do it in your bedroom. So I think the people who I know who have made it have been talented, number one, have been very driven, and have been lucky as hell. That's the answer, because there are so many people out there that are really talented, you're right, I've been doing this a long time, and I've heard some fantastic artists that you will never, ever hear, and only because they just weren't very lucky.
The studio system is still very much an apprentice system, right?
No, now we get kids that come out of these colleges, and sometimes it's great, sometimes it's a problem. Sometimes what they've been taught is not great. We see it because they come out and, first of all, they've never really approached a microphone before. It's all been stuff in the digital world. It's come off of digital instruments into a workstation. It's been manipulated in there, and it's all lives in this digital world. And they've never had to put a mic on a drum. Where would I put it? So yes, it's very different now. No, the kids we get come from internships from here, right? Where's Tim?
Tim's here.
Yeah. So
what makes a good intern, or a good second engineer?
What makes a good, an intern is different a little from the second engineer. An intern is a guy who gets to, like I started, cleans the place up, gets food, makes coffee, and then intrudes on as many sessions as he possibly can and makes himself the biggest pain in the ass in the world. And then he becomes an assistant. Because the kids that don't do that, they're interested in kind of the glitz and the glamour, but they soon find out that there isn't any of that. There's none of it. I mean, I don't care who the artist is in a studio, there's no glitz and there's no glamour. It's just a lot of long hours and hard work, period. So it really kind of, the internship gets rid of most of the kids right away because it's really not what they're looking for. And the ones who stick to it and are a real pain in the ass, they become eventually, because they've been in so many sessions, they now know this is how we hook the cables up, and this is where the microphones go, kind of. I know which kind of microphones go where. Now, to be an assistant, pretty much you better know Pro Tools, backwards, forwards, upwards, downwards. That is just a given. And then our assistants have to know all the analog world as well. So they have to know the console. They have to know the tape machines, how to align them, and all that, you know. So in our place, it's a little bit different because we still work in both worlds.
You must be teaching them how to align a tape machine, because they don't come to you knowing.
No, they don't know that. No. I mean, I remember I was doing a work with a really incredible Cuban guitarist, songwriter, and because I mix onto half-inch tape, and the assistant was like amazed that I actually cut the tape. They'd never seen that before. And then cutting the same thing with 24-track tape, editing 24-track tape with a razor blade and some tape. They hadn't seen that before.
That's a lost art, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no need to do it anymore because really it's much better now in Pro Tools. I mean, that's what's so great about Pro Tools. The edits that I would have loved to have made before and just couldn't because a cymbal, well, that's not true. You know, there might be an edit where you need to edit on a particular drum hit, but a cymbal hangs over that, but the cymbal isn't on the other side of the edit. You know, so it kind of, that's not really good.
No.
So we learned to do these horrendous edits. They called them window pane edits. And instead of just cutting a piece of tape diagonally like this, we would mark on the heads where that track was, and then you'd take it off and you'd put it on a piece of cardboard, and you'd take your razor blade and you would cut it like that, just so that the cymbal would go over long enough, and then you would have to do that on the other side, and then you'd put that together with tape. You run it over the heads a few times, and sometimes it actually worked. So now we don't need to do that.
No.
Now it's a lot easier. Yeah.
Pro Tools did solve that problem.
It sure did, thank God.
Any other questions for John? Come on, engineering.
How much of being an engineer and a producer is getting a good sound out of the equipment, and how much of it is making the musicians feel good so they can make a good sound themselves?
I would say that it's 90% the musicians and 10% the rest of it. You know, the fact of the matter is now, there are all these vintage mics out there, you know, old Neumann and Telefunken microphones, but you can buy incredible microphones now. You can buy incredible mic preamps. I mean, the really good ones are a little expensive, but you have a couple of those, you're set. You're really set, because with those you can do anything. So that part is really technically pretty good. Most of the time, people make the mistake of using too much EQ, too much compression, too much of this, and they actually mess up what they had in the beginning. But really, the performance is everything, and whether the performance comes from the producer, who is going to be like the arranger, or whether it's coming from the musician. I mean, obviously, we live in a kind of different world now where a lot of the music that you listen to is, I'd call it manufactured. It's really a production team doing everything, and then a singer comes in. I mean, because you don't really think Jessica Simpson is like, you know, a great artist. You know, so she has a great team. There is one rarity, Christina Aguilera, who can actually sing and can actually write a song. But she's really an aberration. Most of them have a big production team. They do all the work, and the singer comes in and becomes really famous. It's great. It's great. That used to not exist. It used to be a little bit different.
Records are very much illusions, like movies, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. There are two realities. There's a recorded reality and a live reality. And bands that you have heard that are live sometimes make really crappy albums. And then there are ones that make really, really great albums, but if you've ever heard them live, are just horrible. And then there are some bands that are actually great doing both things. Recording, the whole thing is really an art. There's all this technology involved, but it really is an art. And there are some really great artists out there, great production teams. You know, whatever you think of modern music, there are some great production teams out there that make just phenomenal records.
You still listen to music for fun?
It depends on how long I've been in the studio that day. Sometimes if you've been mixing for 10 or 12 hours, really the last thing you want to hear is music. So I don't. But yes, I listen to music. You know, I page through Audio Lunchbox and places like that to listen to, you know, what's going on. A lot of what I listen to is the sounds, not so much because you know, a lot of the songs are not made for me, they're made for you. Just as when I was your age, the music that was coming out was really not made for my parents. It was really made for me. And so I listen to something maybe differently than you do, because I really listen to what it sounds like, what, you know, how they've used the sound. It's not always something I like, but it's something that I'm interested in, really interested in. I want to know, you know, what they did. And I was always interested. The first time I heard Elton John, and the drums were unbelievable. And for years I tried to figure out how he did that, how he got this drum sound. And then I got to record the same drummer. And the guy came in, he took all the heads off the drums, he put new heads on the drums, he sat there and he tuned them all. And when he played, there it was. Had nothing to do with the engineer at all. You know, I'd been trying everything. I'd been trying all these combinations of EQ. I had like third octave equalizers with all these weird shapes so that I could get the drums to sound like this guy's drums sounded without doing anything. So I guess that's what makes it interesting. That's what will keep you in this business for that long, is that kind of interest, that you're interested in music or the business part, or you're interested in the sound and the making of the records. If you're not desperately interested in doing it, then you're probably in the wrong business. And the days where it's good, it's so gloriously good that you just have to want to get on your knees and thank God that you got to do this. Sometimes it is that good. With Stevie, he would play, you know, we did long sessions. I mean, really, sometimes 48 hours at a time. And at the end of the session, he would sit down at a piano like this, and he would play, and it'd be like request hour, and he'd play. Man, I mean, you know, that's worth everything that you've gone through, because, like I say, it's a really lousy business.
Except when it's not.
Except when it's so unbelievably good.
Well, thanks very much for talking to us tonight.
You're quite welcome.
John Fischbach.